Well, what a fool I was for thinking that yesterday's video on KK with the Hurricanes would be the last time we spoke about this entire thing. But I completely forgot about the one more, maybe final nail in the coffin, I guess, to go over when it comes to Kotkaniemi and his departure, his adieu from the Montreal Canadiens system. It's the Marc Bergevin press conference. Now, we had ourselves the quotes that were published earlier today, actually, and what we're going to be doing in this video is just reading the quotes. We're going over onto Habs Chronicle, we're going over on NHL Watcher on Twitter, and we're just seeing what was said by Marc Bergevin about the entire KK situation. We're just going to read, and this is a video format that usually happens for Vancouver videos. Like, I'm not going to lie here, this video format doesn't usually get explored for Canadiens topics, but hey, we'll see if this really works in this market with this fan base, because I know for Vancouver fans, they love these kinds of videos, but we've never really done these for Habs fans, so it's a nice change of pace. But today we're talking about Kotkaniemi, Marc Bergevin, his quotes, and what he said about the entire offer sheet situation. So let's go over onto Habs Chronicle's Twitter account, because they summarize the first parts of the press conference that I wanted to talk about here. Marc Bergevin says that they give the same tools to every player to reach their full potential. He says players need to be able to properly assess their own play, and not all of them do it well. He doesn't say that Jesperi Kotkaniemi falls into this bucket, but it is implied. A tweet from Arpon Basu goes over a similar kind of idea, an interesting availability with Marc Bergevin, who obviously defended their development of KK and doubled down on the player's responsibility. He admits, in hindsight, another year in Finland would have been the right move, and says they will learn from that experience. Bergevin was quite pleased to be able to get his hands on Christian Dvorak, who we are speaking with now. Called him a solid two-way center who can yada yada yada. We're not talking about Dvorak, we're talking about KK. So Marc Bergevin goes out there and refers to Kotkaniemi in the lens of player development and talks about how they gave this guy chances to succeed. He doubles down, though, on the idea that players need to be responsible of their own development, and it's somewhat implied that KK might have just not done this all too well. It is interesting, though, how Bergevin did say an extra year in Finland probably would have helped out Kotkaniemi, and it's kind of funny because, like, that is the perspective that I was going for back in 2018 when he was drafted. You could see all the reaction videos that I made, man. Like, I was super shocked to see him go third. In fact, there's another quote over here as to whether or not Bergevin regrets going with KK at third overall, which is the entire reason you clicked on this video, right? But Kotkaniemi going back to the Porinasat for 2018-19 would have done wonders for his game. It's not like he was already, super dominant in the Liga and he had nothing more to prove. He still had more to develop in Finland, as you can see, his last season in the Liga before heading over to North America. 29 points, 57 games played, 17, turning 18 years old. He had turned 18 in the summer that year. You couldn't tell me that this guy was bona fide, absolutely ready, and he would have been in the best position possible had he just gone to the NHL rather than maybe staying another year, maybe becoming the number one guy for the Asat and being, a 40-point, 45-point in 50-something game played player. That would have been really good for his overall development and his maturity, Like, it's his first year playing in a full-time number one pro men's league, and then he goes to the NHL right away. Granted, he was okay in the NHL, but his development really did take a little bit of a hit afterwards. Let's go over onto the other quotes here by Marc Bergevin on Jesperi Kotkaniemi. He says that KK forced their hand. He wasn't worth $6.1 million, and there are players they wanted to keep that would be due soon. Suzuki and Caulfield. He said getting Dvorak made it easier to let KK go. He says they thought about how much pressure KK would have been under in Montreal, also with that $6.1 million contract, and that factored into the decision. That's actually a pretty interesting part as well. Yes, we know KK isn't worth $6.1 million, and we know the cap situation of the Canadiens. They have themselves some other contracts, some guys are going to need to re-sign soon, so it makes sense. But the pressure argument is one that we actually hadn't talked about a lot over here, but I think it makes a total amount of sense when you discuss it like that. Let's say KK gets matched. He stays in Montreal. What's going to happen when that guy steps out onto the ice for the first time in front of the Bell Center fans? They're going to have a reaction to that. They're going to hold this guy to a standard that says, wow, you signed an extraordinarily overpaid contract. You better play like that, KK. And if you don't, hey, we know how to run guys out of town here in Montreal. Okay, I'm not going to joke. No. We're not going to talk about that. Let's just say the Montreal Canadiens fan base, when they're not on the same page with a player they have, they can be pretty ruthless. And I don't think any Canadiens fan is going to get mad at me for saying it like that, because you all know it's true. Come on. He would have been under intense pressure had he stuck around in Montreal getting paid $6.1 million, which is another reason why they were like, okay, let's just let him go to Carolina. Furthermore, Bergevin confirms that the offer sheet compensation, the first and the third round picks, were indeed better than the trade offer on the table for KK from Carolina beforehand. So that kind of confirms Pierre LeBrun's little tweet that he said, where he was like, yeah, the Hurricanes really like Kotkaniemi. They were trying to get him earlier in trade negotiations, but that didn't work out, so they just offer sheeted the guy and got him for a first and a third instead. Come to think of it, could it not have been a little bit smarter for the Hurricanes to just go, okay, we'll give you a first and a third, Bergevin. Here, can we get Kotkaniemi? They trade away Kotkaniemi because Bergevin probably says yes, and then they sign him to like a $2 million deal. Could they have not just done that instead? They didn't need to go through this entire offer sheet route, waiting an entire week to get the thing done. Oh my goodness, Carolina, man. I can't believe I'm just realizing this right now. Anyways, let's go over onto the last quotes over here before we end this video off. Marc Bergevin has repeated many times that young players don't always have a good understanding of their own play, and sometimes they lack a bit of maturity. He has yet to directly say KK was like this, but this was in response to several questions about Kotkaniemi. So, take that as you will, I guess. Finally, let's go over onto NHL Watchers Twitter, because they posted one more quote that I thought was extraordinarily valuable to go out there and talk about. Let's take a look at this. Bergevin, asked whether he regrets taking KK at 3, says maybe he could have gotten him at 5 instead, but you need a dance partner to trade back. He heard teams behind them were looking at him. He doesn't see it as a mistake, as there is one team in the NHL that thinks he is worth $6.1 million. So obviously, there is potential. And you know, this is the kind of thing that really strikes a chord with me, I guess? Strikes a chord? I don't know if that's the right way to talk about it, but it really does kind of bring itself back up, because in 2018, you gotta remember, who was 5th overall in that year? That was the Arizona Coyotes, and they took themselves another pick that a lot of people thought was a big surprise at the top of that 2018 draft. Okay, Dahlin, 1st overall, not a big deal. Svechnikov 2nd, not a big deal. KK at 3rd was seen as a shock. Tkachuk at 4, Ottawa, not a big deal either. A lot of people expected that. Barrett Hayton at 5, though, to the Arizona Coyotes, was seen as probably the biggest shock in that entire top 10. Because he was supposed to go somewhere in the latter half of the either 10s or the early teens. He should have been there, but he was 5th overall instead. So if Marc Bergevin's going out there and saying, maybe we could have had Kotkaniemi at 5th overall, it kind of gets me intrigued, because the way the Arizona Coyotes were going about that draft, they needed themselves a center too. And if rumor is correct that they were going out there and thinking about a center 100%, which is what they did because they took Barrett Hayton, would they have not taken Kotkaniemi instead at 3rd overall? Like, I remember that draft being not super developed in terms of its centers. It had a lot of defenders because Boucher, Dobson, Hughes, Boquist, Dahlin, whatever. But for the center position, it was like Barrett Hayton, Kotkaniemi, and Joe Veleno, who went at the end of the first round, who were supposed to be top talented guys. Everybody else was a winger or a D-man. So had Marc Bergevin dropped to 5th overall, who's to say that the Arizona Coyotes would have taken Barrett Hayton at 3rd? Maybe they would have taken KK instead, who knows? We also had rumors, though, that Bergevin and the Habs were actually really interested in Barrett Hayton as well. Seriously, this is a video we made all those years ago talking about the revisionist history stuff. They legitimately considered drafting Barrett Hayton instead of KK. And if it got to that point, then I mean, okay, well, look at what Barrett Hayton has done at the NHL level so far. He hasn't really been all too great either. Who's to say that they shouldn't have just drafted a Quinn Hughes or a Tkachuk or a, I don't know, Philip Zadina or whatever, or maybe anybody else later on in the draft? They had a lot of good players taken after, but Either way, that is our video here today on Kotkaniemi, Marc Bergevin, and the offer sheet conversation over here. Probably the last one we'll make for a while. I don't really know if there's any videos we can talk about with KK anymore because we've driven that topic into the ground so much. Either way, though, talk to me in the comments. What do you think about Bergevin's comments? Do you think there is regret there on the part of drafting KK third overall? Do you think there's regret on the development of KK and his ways in Montreal? Talk to me in the comments. What do you think? If you enjoyed this video, Rosén, and bye.